Hi, we're here with Zach Mullen of the Lower Nehalem Watershed Council, and I am pleased to introduce him to the Tillamook County Pioneers podcast series on get to know your Watershed Council nonprofit uh, leader. So I'm going to let Zach take it away.
Hi. Zach Mullen, the Lower Nehalem Watershed Council Coordinator. I'm currently the only employee of the Lower Nehalem Watershed Council. And I thought we'd just kind of start off with a little background on watershed councils in general, because I'm not sure if your listeners are really familiar with the history that got us to having this network of small organizations across the state that do this work. So really it kind of goes back to the late 90s, mid to late 90s, when salmon populations throughout Oregon and Washington really hit a low point. And the state got together, and there was like state legislatures and other folks got together, and activist groups and industry as well, to really talk about how did we get here and what's going wrong? Why don't we have the salmon runs we used to have? And something that became clear was that there were a lot of very strong feelings about what was or was not the problem. But there was also agreement on what the solutions were. And so there might not have been necessarily a lot of agreement on a lot of other topics around it. Some of the actions were things that people thought that they could actually come to the table on and agree on. And so that led to House Bill 3341 in 1995, which set up the structure for watershed councils as as independent nonprofits that are officially recognized by their local county governments. So the county commissioners essentially wrote a letter saying we recognize the Lower Nehalem Watershed Council as the watershed council in their own geography, and then brought together community members to form the boards for those watershed councils, drawing from both industry and activist groups and just interested citizens in general. So that also then led to the salmon plan coming out of the governor's office while Governor Kitzhaber was there. And that laid a lot of the groundwork for what we now have as this.
And for the listeners that don't know, is that the Oregon Plan for Salmon and Watersheds? Or is that, yeah.
Yeah.
So if they're going to Google it, give them the whole name.
Yeah.
I'm sure the salmon plan is probably a diet as well. So we want to make sure we send them to the right place.
And if it is a diet, I'm kind of interested in it. But yeah, so it was the Oregon Plan for Salmon and Watersheds in 1997. But all that laid the groundwork for both the types of techniques we would use to do salmon habitat restoration, as well as the ways in which watershed councils were going to operate. And that's a really important piece of kind of the niche we fit into. Because
so just for people who aren't familiar with watershed councils, the thing that's very unique about them is the collaboration between industry and homeowners and environmentalists and researchers and government at all levels. So the idea is that the watersheds belong to everybody and we all have a say. So I wanted to ask you, before we get too far back from your founding, what year were you formed, the Lower Nehalem Watershed Council? What year was you're not one of the first councils, correct?
We were one of the earlier ones, actually. So interestingly enough, we originally formed as, I forget what the old name was, but initially there was one watershed council that covered all of the Nehalem watershed, which is a huge coverage area. It's actually one of the larger watersheds in northern Oregon, on the northern Oregon coast. And then in 1997, the two councils split into the upper and lower Nehalem watershed, largely because that was a way to be able to serve both kind of communities. Because
geography.
Yeah, the geography is pretty vast. For me down here, to go up to the Upper Nehalem and some of the project sites they have up there, I'm not even leaving the Coast Range, and it'll still be a 3.5 hour drive to some of their project locations if I were to go up and visit, right? It's over 2 hours for me to get to some of my project sites within my geography, let alone out there, because you're up on twisty mountain, timber roads and stuff, and it gets pretty, it can be slow going. So yeah, we were established in 1997, largely with the goal of being able to better serve the local community's interests down here, as well as giving the Upper Nehalem the opportunity to have coverage that was more focused on their region.
What would you say is one of the primary differences in the types of projects that you do in the Lower Nehalem versus the Upper Nehalem?
So a lot of the work we do is the same, and we actually have a big partnership going on with the Upper Nehalem as well to kind of bring a lot of a broader focus to all of our work, to try to coordinate better between us and all of our partners. That's called the Nehalem Basin Partnership. Kind of right on the nose there. One of the big differences, though, between the two of us is that here in the Lower Nehalem, we actually, we're where the estuary is, right? And so we have an opportunity to do work with things like tide gate replacements or removals, depending on the situation, or
right, which are
restoration.
Very expensive. And I wanted to ask you about the funding that you get. Those can be $10 million projects or more to replace tide gates, and they can take 10 years or more depending on where they're located, just to even get approved. So what does your annual funding look like? How big is your average project? And with the understanding that a small tree planting isn't going to cost the same as a large tide gate removal project, but let's talk about your budget a little bit.
Yeah, great. So on the tide gate point specifically, one of the flagship projects that my predecessor, Alex Lee, did down here in the Lower Nehalem was the McDonald Slough tide gate replacement. And that was a partnership with the Nearing family's farm. And they had a failing tide gate, actually two failing tide gates. There were two pipes with two doors on them. And so the Lower Nehalem was approached about helping out with the replacement of that. The process actually went through, I think, 2 different council coordinators. So I think it was in total something like 6 years to actually implement it, from design into permitting into actually being built. And that project cost, I think, something in the range of $600,000 to $700,000 just for construction, and that was back in 2016. And so obviously inflation has changed some of those costs at this stage, and then engineering was another cost on top of that as well. And so the funding for that was put together through a series of grants and some private contributions that came in. Including OWEB, which is the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board. There was funding from, I think, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, if I remember correctly, put up some money for it. And I also believe NIFWIF was involved as well, which is a National
Fish and Wildlife Service.
Foundation. Yeah.
Foundation. Oh, Foundation.
NIFWIF.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, not the service. Yes.
Not the service. No.
Can you tell me a little bit about the foundation?
So it's a federally funded grant agency that operates nationally, and they are doing work focused on fish habitat and wildlife habitat around the nation. And so there are some offerings that are very geographically focused. So there are a couple that are focused on, for instance, Northwest estuaries that I'll apply for sometimes. There are others that are a bit broader, like we recently received a grant from them from their Bring Back the Native Fish fund, which is another one of their grant programs. And they also do they also have programs focused on things like sage grouse, or on, Midwest prairie restoration and, water conservation in the Southwest. And there's a Chesapeake Bay specific fund that they work out of. So they have programs all across the nation. And so there's one of the avenues through which the federal government delivers grant funding to. And so, for instance, the big infrastructure bill that got passed, that put money, huh?
Just could you, to elaborate and make it more local, how much money came to us from that bill?
So it's still coming in. And, I mean,
that's great to know.
Yeah, it's important to be realistic about how federal systems work. And so currently, I know that out of that, the Lower Nehalem Watershed Council is going to be managing, rough estimate here, because I'm just trying to tally them all up in my head right now. We've secured somewhere in the range of $1 million to $1.5 million of funding for projects here in the Lower Nehalem. And these are focused on tide gate work. They're focused on fish passage barriers, replacing culverts. It's focused on some in-stream enhancement work. So when we go through and we put large wood back into rivers that was previously removed for because of misguided direction from the Fish and Wildlife Service up into the 80s, where they were
unclear. Yes.
Yeah.
Unclear direction. It was like you did need to remove some of the wood because there was a deoxygenation problem.
Yep.
With throwing the slash from timber operations into the creeks and causing mass fish deaths. But then what they did is they removed all of the wood and sometimes the gravel and the rocks too, and it just became a nice tube. So
there was a forester I was talking to who'd he's been, he's retired now, but he worked for decades in forestry in this area, and he was telling me about driving a bulldozer down a creek to like clear the wood out of the creek so the fish could get up. And I'm just sitting there thinking, yeah, they gave you such bad advice back then.
It would have been nice if some of the forestry practices that happened in the 50s, 60s, and 70s had the information that we have now.
Exactly.
I feel like it was probably within human history. Somebody had it, but we lost it. So,
and we work with the best information we have, right?
Yes.
The work I'm doing right now is being done based on like a combination of modeling efforts with, GIS data that we've taken and been able to model potential, for instance, like beaver enhancement projects where we're trying to encourage beaver to establish in areas where they can have good habitat benefit without impacting other people, or targeting areas for large wood placement, and that are going to have the greatest impact for our dollar. We could throw wood in everywhere, but it's time consuming, and you have to hire people, contractors, and equipment, and source the wood, which is surprisingly difficult to find the material the size we need. And so we have a prioritization that was based originally off of a model, and then we field verified by having a team go out and literally walk 303 miles of the Lower Nehalem coverage area, all the anadromous miles of our area, to identify which of those areas would be the most impactful to do work on, right? And we call those anchor habitats because they serve every freshwater stage of a salmon's life cycle, from red, which is where the eggs are laid, all the way to spawning and rearing in between before they go out to sea. So
I could talk about fish all day, but we only have a few more minutes in this podcast. So I would like to shift focus a little bit and talk about the partnerships that you have with private individuals and the kind of how people might get involved, either through tree planting or outreach events, anything that you have, if they could join the board or apply to join your board, how that works, and anything else you would like to wrap up with.
Yeah, definitely. So when it comes to partnerships, we partner with literally anybody who wants to come to the table, right? Our interest is specifically in getting work done. And so if our needs align or our goals can align on something, we'll work with everybody. Some really good examples of that are, we did a project up on West Fork Coal Creek here in the Nehalem, where some landowners were concerned about a bank eroding underneath their road. And we were able to do a large wood placement in that reach that was also able to simultaneously improve fish habitat in one of our anchor habitats and divert water away from the eroding bank in a way that has actually started material to accumulate on that bank instead of undercutting it, which is pretty cool. You know, it's a nice meeting point between people's needs and interests. You know, we also have partnerships with the Department of Forestry or private timber companies like Weyerhaeuser and Greenwood, where we've done either culvert replacements with them or large wood placements on their properties in association with, you know, they're doing a timber harvest, so the gear is already all out there to do the wood placement, and then we go in and do that. Another one of our partnerships is also a volunteer opportunity sometimes, is we partner with NORP, which is the, gotta get this right, Northwest Oregon Restoration Partnership. And it's an association of a bunch of different nonprofits who all help support a native plant nursery located down in Tillamook. And NORP is a great partnership that produces all of our plant material, which means we're getting all locally adapted plant material. And they often need help either with weeding or with uppotting plants. And so planting parties happen for that. My email list will occasionally send out notifications about it, and so will Tillamook Estuary Partnerships, who host that.
And how does one get involved with the Watershed Council? What's the best way for them to get started? If they've never heard of one, do they just reach out to you directly and go to your website, or are there monthly meetings? How does that work?
Yeah, so a great way to reach out to us is just to email me directly, info@nehalemwatershed.org. You can also ask in that email, or soon you can sign up on the website. We're in the middle of a website update right now. You'll be able to sign up for our mailing list as well. And in that way, I'll notify people about things like board meetings, which happen every other month, as well as volunteer opportunities like working with NORP or other things like that. Also, the Nehalem Estuary Cleanup that happens every other year. We'll send out notifications about that, and we bring out 160 volunteers in partnership with the Lower Nehalem Community Trust, separate organization. They're a land trust. We're a watershed council, but we do partner on the estuary cleanup every other year. So yeah, emailing me directly is a great way to get in touch, and people who are interested in our work and in the process of being engaged in something where we're focused on specifically getting work done and not on any other cultural conflicts that might be around it. We always welcome people to join our board and get involved with our work. I'll admit board members spend most of their time talking about kind of high level organizational health stuff. But there are
Yeah,
also,
actually,
yeah,
tell me a little bit about your board structure.
yeah,
Who are your members?
yeah, definitely. So we currently have a 5-member board that can expand up to, I believe, 9 is what our top cap is. And our current board members are Mark McLaughlin, who is a local teacher and teaches natural resource stuff at Nehalem County High School. Will Russell, who actually owns a bunch of ag land and leases it out for use. And so he brings some perspective from that, as well as some community connections there. We also have David Doherty on our board. David is a forester with Greenwood Timber. We also have Greg Foster on our board. Greg Foster is he comes to us as a interested citizen who has a background in marine resources. He used to do a lot of work on actually coral reef mapping, and he's a PhD who has since retired. And then Monica Schaefer, who is a communication specialist, who can probably help me a lot more. And I'm looking forward to picking her brain for more communication strategies, because my background is in natural resources, not in necessarily talking to people.
Well, I feel you have a very robust board. If people wanted to attend a board meeting and see what it was like, do you meet on Zoom or is it a face-to-face?
So we have been meeting on Zoom for a while. It's just really easy for all of our board members to do it that way. And we recently purchased some technology pieces so that we can do hybrid meetings. And so face-to-face meetings might be returning, before the end of the year. We're not quite there yet. But our next board meeting is on August 10th. It will be on Zoom because we haven't made arrangements for otherwise.
Right.
And announcements about it will go out both through our email list, as well as they'll go out on the North Coast Barbecue and in other similar locations. Right, we'll be sending out information about how to attend everywhere we can.
Perfect.
Yep.
So is there anything that we didn't get to that you would like to end with? We have, I think, 3 minutes.
The other really great way to get involved with the Watershed Council is to have us do a project on your property. We do everything from riparian plantings. If you have a creek that runs through your property that doesn't have plants along it, we can find grant funding to plant your creekside property. We also do culvert replacements where there is anadromous fish presence, so salmon presence. If you have a fish barrier culvert, something we can do is we can find grant funding to get it upgraded to a fish passable crossing, be it a culvert or a small bridge. And if you are interested in doing something a bit more bold and you have river frontage, we also do large wood projects, and they are very exciting. They're a little bit messy. We have a video coming out in the next month and a half that highlights that West Fork Coal Creek project and talks about both the great things about that kind of work and some of the experience of having it happen on your property, and how it's not necessarily always an attractive experience, right? It can be kind of jarring to see big changes on your property like that. So I'm really excited to share that with everybody. And if you're interested in us doing a project on your property, that's a really great way to, start to get involved with the Watershed Council and see what we do firsthand. And again, my email is info@nehalemwatershed.org. And that is a great way to reach me.
Wonderful. Well, I'm really curious, just mostly about the mileage of streams, the stream miles you've planted.
So in the last several years, so I don't have a running total of how many the Watershed Council has planted overall, but we have done work on the last 2 years. I would say we have hit about 5 miles of stream frontage planted, and a big chunk of that was on the Nehalem River Ranch, where we did 1.5 miles of planting up there.
And for context, the Nehalem River is 120 miles long, roughly.
Yep. And so we are always finding and implementing new planting projects. And we do everything from 100-foot stretches to, 1.5, 2 mile reaches when the opportunity arises.
About how many more miles would you say need to be planted to restore the riparian connectivity that we lost over the last 100 years or so?
That's a hard question to answer, right? I have a prioritization that we've done recently of where we think some of the highest hitting riparian plantings could be for intercepting solar radiation and keeping rivers cooler.
I think that's a great corollary.
And that, I believe, we have highlighted about 60 miles of it that we are really interested in working on.
And that includes the tributaries, correct? Not just main stem.
Tributaries as well. Yep.
Because the main stem Nehalem is 120 miles long, but it includes, I would say, thousands of miles of tributaries. So, depending on what you count as a tributary.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. When we think about how many anadromous miles, how many miles of it are available and accessible to fish, we are talking in the range of about 1,000 miles, roughly. 303 of which are in the lower Nehalem's coverage area, which is all of the North Fork Nehalem, and then the main stem up to the confluence with Humbug Creek.
So the prioritization that you've recently conducted, where are you targeting for this kind of planting work, and where are you targeting for the tree planting work? Is it mostly things like Foley Creek and Coal Creek, like smaller streams, or are you looking elsewhere?
So something I always tell people is that good habitat starts in the headwaters, right? So I like to look from that perspective. And so we are definitely looking, and we have prioritized areas in Foley Creek and in Coal Creek, and in many other areas too. Also in the estuary, we have some areas we would like to see planted as well. But our whole prioritization is published in the, it's right here actually, Strategic Action Plan for the Protection and Restoration of Coho Salmon Habitat, which the Nehalem Basin Partnership has available to share with people. You can get a hold of it through me. We're going to have an interactive map set up on the Nehalem Basin Partnership website, so you can see all the areas that we are targeting for riparian planting, for large wood placement, for culvert replacements and fish passage barrier, replacement, etc. And again, I am interested in everything from small properties where you only have a limited area of frontage on a small creek, all the way up to, if you live directly on the Nehalem River itself and want to do a planting there. And we also help manage invasive species while we do that kind of work as well. So if you have a big blackberry patch or a big knotweed patch, we will help you to manage that in a way that is good both for your property and for the river and for fish, as best as possible.
Well, wonderful. I think that is about as much time as we can possibly squeeze out of Zoom. So unless we want to start paying for it, the Pioneer is always looking for sponsors. So I would love to end again with your email, which is info@nehalemwatershed.org.
Yep, info@nehalemwatershed.org.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Zach. It was really informative, and I had a good time. So I hope that you enjoyed it. And this has been the Tillamook County Pioneers podcast series on getting to know your local nonprofits. Thank you. All right.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.